Good evening, YouTube audience. Glad to see you here on my 17th YouTube Live. A lot of developments happened. Libra 2022 is no joke. A lot of changes. Please, if you're on this YouTube Live, subscribe, like, and share my YouTube. I'm trying to elevate the conversation. That's everything I'm about, everything I'm trying to do on this social media network in terms of all the stories that we hear is about elevation, elevating the vibration of the conversation. So over the past week, we've had two amazing documentaries of Sidney Poitier. I want to break down each, particularly the second documentary that came out that I saw, that's giving a more in-depth look about the life of Sidney Poitier. And for real, when I look at Sidney Poitier's face, I'm reminded, I always think of the face of my father, from the forehead to the nose to the lips. I see my father. So when I saw A Raisin in the Sun, the Sidney Poitier version, I saw my dad in many ways similar to Walter Lee Younger. And what a protagonist to play. What a protagonist. But before then, he had a slew of works that really united, that showed the value, the dignity of the Black male presence. But with that, you had an amazing documentary produced by Ms. Oprah Winfrey and by Reginald Hudlin that premiered recently called Sidney. I got a chance to see that, and it's an amazing film. You really get the perspectives of his first wife, Juanita, as well as his daughters. You get also the impact of his films, the most influential films. You get his dedication to his family. You get how dedicated he was as a father and the unique relationships he had with each of his daughters, the strong relationships he had, and his undying belief that just like the title of his book, The Measure of a Man, the measure of a man is how well he's able to provide, Sidney Poitier believed, for his children. The measure of a man is how well he's able to provide for his children. So he lived by that, and we're all the better for his work. He transitioned this year, January 26th, around the same time that Cicely Tyson transitioned the year before, and literally on Ms. Winfrey's birthday. She is, no, she's the 29th. Sidney Poitier transitioned on the 26th. But I wanted to look at two particular parts of the film Sidney, two different comments that I thought was striking. The first comment was by Greg Tate, who also transitioned since being in the film Sidney, because I want to talk about two films, two documentaries on Sidney Poitier. One called Sidney, and two called The Significance of Sidney Poitier. That was produced by Mike Dennis and Charles Woods. In the first Sidney, there were two different perspectives that I thought made Sidney interesting. It was produced on Apple TV, and according to Ms. Winfrey, they rolled out the red carpet in terms of how they presented him, how they promoted the film, how they showed the true essence of, as Ms. Winfrey said, who he is, Sidney Poitier is. And three things that struck me about that film, Sidney. Mr. Poitier's point, to me, he's Mr. Poitier. I mean, he is a legend, a film legend, in terms of showing dramatic roles in which the character assumes their own dignity. Probably the most viral uh, film performance he did is in The Heat of the Night, when, as a detective, he's smacked by the business owner and then smacks the business owner back. But I realized after watching the second documentary, The Significance of Sidney Poitier, that my favorite performance of his work had to be The Pressure Point. I played that, and I need to see the whole film, because just from that excerpt of The Pressure Point, I had to play that scene over and over because I was usually I'm not emotionally with Sidney Poitier's performances, but I was emotionally there with him. And it was just a no more than 1 minute excerpt of this film, Pressure Point. So I want to play that excerpt later today. But what Reginald Hudlin and Ms. Winfrey put of all of Sidney Poitier's words He said they have him narrating from this book, The Measure of a Man, and he said, "When I die, I will not be afraid of having lived." And that documentary shows that he lived, the first one and the second one, in different ways. In that first documentary called Sidney, they have Greg Tate saying that his works mainly were not for a Black audience. And that really struck me because even though he, as a Black actor, performed roles of dignity, Greg Tate made clear that, a lot of these white directors, and we thank them, thank you to many of these white directors for seeing the value of Sidney Poitier and casting him. But that point just echoed over and over in my mind in so many different ways that a lot of the films Poitier performed in were not for Black audiences. The other point in the first Sidney documentary was Ms. Winfrey saying that he was our great Black hope. And I thought, wow, what an interesting role. I mean, I think it is true that he represented a lot of hope for Black people, the hope of the harmony, the hope of the cooperation, especially in that film, The Defiant Ones, where in that memorable scene, he's on the train and he holds his hand out to the fellow white working class man. And instead of staying on the train, because he held his hand out and the white worker who was running after him couldn't get the strong enough grip to come on the train, Sidney Poitier's character fell off of the train. And they include that clip because I think that's part of what made Sidney Poitier so appealing to a mainstream audience, that he shows the enormous sacrifice the Black working man is willing to make for the white working man. So it's a tremendous symbolic role that Sidney played, and especially for the Black immigrant in the States, which my mother, my father, myself, I consider myself, my own experience closer to the Black immigrant experience. Um, it's so symbolic. Sidney Poitier represents that bridge. His performances represent the possibility of absolute harmony and cooperation between the races, the ability to work together. So I think what I wrote on my IG, which I think is absolutely true for the first film, Sidney, is that the genius of the screenplay, I'm listening to the screenplay, I'm listening to what the documentarian is getting um, his interviewees to say. I'm listening to what's said in the narration. I'm listening to how those who are speaking for the film are creating a long story. And in that screenplay, in the screenplay of this Sidney, I think the biggest genius in this screenplay is including those two different perspectives of Greg Tate's believing that his films were not made for a Black audience, and Ms. Winfrey's belief that Poitier is our great Black hope, what she said in the film. And I think, can one be a great Black hope and not work for a Black audience or completely turn their back to a Black audience? I think this documentary absolutely raises that question. So it was very interesting in that respect. The second awesome documentary I saw about the work of Sidney Poitier was produced by Charles Woods and Mike Dennis. It's called The Significance of Sidney Poitier. And I like how Woods and Mike Dennis really framed the narrative. The narrative, a lot of the narrative comes from Sidney Poitier's 2002 honorary Oscar speech, when he runs down the list of all, um, it's not all of them, but most of the white male directors who hired him. He names them and thanks them. And I thought that was a significant part of his life that we didn't really get in the first Sidney film. Um, Sidney Poitier names Joe Mankiewicz, who directed No Way Out, Richard Brooks, Ralph Nelson, Daryl Zanuck, Stanley Kramer, um, Gay Green, Norman Jewison. And these are directors who had the foresight and the vision to see and understand the importance of the work of Sidney Poitier to make sure he's employed. Um, and for me personally, I never knew in this particular film. Oh, I have to, before I go on about that second film, I wanted to point out um, the part in his book, The Measure of a Man, that stuck out most, that dovetailed, I believe, with the message in the film. Poitier writes on the very last sentence of Measure of a Man. So, what we do is we stay within the context of what's practical, what's real, what dreams can be fashioned into reality, what values can send us to bed comfortably and make us courageous enough to face our end with character. And that is absolutely what he did throughout his roles. It's what definitely what the film Sidney, produced by Reginald Hudlin and Oprah Winfrey, did. Show him as somebody who was courageous enough to live his truth and face his end with character. As I mentioned, the second film I saw about his work is called The Significance of Sidney Poitier. And this film really gave you, as I said, the narration of the film is from Poitier's 2002 Oscar speech, where he names particular directors, grateful for their influence. Um, the first Sydney film, I had a lot of questions. You know, one of those questions was, how can somebody be a great Black hope and not work for a Black audience consciously and not try to serve a Black audience? Well, this particular film addresses that question and addresses Sidney Poitier's role with a Black audience, um, particularly through films I have never seen before. I found what turns out to be probably the most impactful speech or impactful performance I've ever seen Sidney Poitier in. I found it in this documentary called The Significance of Sidney Poitier in a particular part of this piece I want to go to. I just wanted to mention the parts of films with Sidney Poitier that Mike Dennis and Charles Wood chose to put in their documentary called The Significance of Sidney Poitier. They are powerful and they are absolutely worth an in-depth look. They're worth an in-depth look. Um, there's they show this particular excerpt of a film called All the Young Men. It's a 1960 film directed by Hal Bartlett. And the part that Mike and Charles chose, I mean, this white character ends up really insulting and raking Poitier's character over the coals for like being a model Negro. He said, I mean, if you're going to defy my orders, they're in the military ranks. So Sidney Poitier's character is trying to basically pull rank on this military superior. I forget who this actor is, and this actor's character tells Poitier's character, all they're going to do for you if you defy my orders is put up a statue in the cotton fields, you know. But the way he delivers it is just like, bam. And that choice by Mike and Charles to put in this documentary is so apropos to, you know, a lot of what was said in the 60s about the value of tokenism. Is Sidney Poitier really a token? And what good could actually a token do if all the token does is uh, celebrates the hard labor that they're already paid very poorly for? So this character is lying to Poitier saying that you defying my orders is just going to make you a statue in the cotton field. Wow. It just shows and asks to what extent Sidney Poitier's greater influence is. You know, they chose excellent, excellent excerpts of Poitier's work. And I just want to show this particular excerpt that I've never seen before that blew me away of Sidney Poitier himself. I just want to share that excerpt of I just want to share that excerpt of Pressure Point, where Poitier's character really challenges white American Christendom. And as Charles Wood said, a lot of his characters, is it really, in fact, a great white hope, or is it a revolutionary? And when you look at Sidney's work, because he believed what he believed about the measure of a man being uh, the type of person who's able to provide for his children, you could understand, and then the pressure that is on many Black men to not assume that role, and the danger in assuming the role of a huge world changer or a revolutionary. There's danger in that. By doing that, you're jeopardizing, especially as a Black man, one's ability to provide for your children. So Charles Wood's question is a very valid one. It's a very important one. It's a very serious one when you think about what kind of influence do you want to make. If it's an influence that is going to provide for your children, then if you want to make sure you provide for your children, do not rock the boat. And I applaud Sidney for choosing his path and operating in that path, being in that path, operating in that path proficiently, because it is an important example. And what it did is it elevated the image of Black people. So we're grateful for that. Um, this is a screen that I thought was particularly important in Mike Dennis's and Charles Wood's documentary on Sidney Poitier. So Sidney Poitier appeared in over 50 films between 1950 and 2001. He directed 9 features in Hollywood between 1972 and 1990. Uh, he mentioned the film, this documentary also mentioned the film that Richard Pryor was in that grossed $100,000. And or the narration mentioned that Sidney Poitier was the first Black man to direct such a high grossing film in Hollywood. Um, that was the film with Richard Pryor. Um, and the name is escaping me now. He also did this film. Also, what I thought was important about this documentary, the significance of Sidney Poitier, was its mention of Uptown Saturday Night, which was powerful in the commercial and the reach that the film had. So you see how, and the first film, Sidney, didn't really talk about the deep love that Poitier had, not only for acting, but for directing and producing. He was very serious about the industry and not only being an actor, but being a producer, being a director, being in charge of the image, the production of the image. And he did that. He was able to show and direct to a successful commercial degree, highly successful. So the first film, Sidney, more or less, uh, almost, but does not express the deep passion for producing that Poitier had. And it seemed like that was what caused the rift between Poitier and his first wife, Miss Juanita, who is in the first film, Sidney Poitier. Sidney is the name of that first film. But I'm not sure as a viewer if watching it, Ms. Juanita understood the urgency. It seemed like he had an urgency based on the work that he did in the 70s. Poitier had an urgency to produce, and he needed a partner that would support that urgency. And I wanted the Sidney film to talk more about his passion for producing, but we didn't get there. But in any event, it was an amazing film because you get the family man side of Poitier. You absolutely get the family man side of him. So check out Sidney, produced by Ms. Oprah Winfrey and by Reginald Hudlin, and make sure you also check out The Significance of Sidney Poitier, produced by Mike Dennis. Please support his Real Black, which is $Real Black. Mike Dennis was also the videographer of my fifth play, The Original Mrs. Garvey, in April, and I appreciate his support. So make sure you support his YouTube channel. He's not on YouTube anymore. He's not able to be monetized, unfortunately. So make sure you support him directly through Real Black. Real Black does amazing work in documenting, archiving our history that we can't really get anywhere else. We're not getting these perspectives of Sidney Poitier and Pressure Point from the Sidney film. We didn't get um, the film he did with Ruby D, which is in the significance of Sidney Poitier, Edge of the City, a film that he performed with Ruby D in. So make sure you support Real Black at $ Real Black. You can also support my Cash App if I'm teaching you things in addition to um, The Measure of a Man and the Sydney film. Please give to my Cash App. It's $ Roan Fraser. Last message I have about for this 17th YouTube live is there's an amazing new reader about a powerful DC native um, who spoke to me a lot, whose story spoke to me in originally the work by Charles Lemert and Esme Bond, who collected her writings. And it's as thick as this book. This is a different reader called The Portable Anna Julia Cooper, edited by Shirley Moody Turner, who I worked with briefly at ALA, American Literature Association, and who's a professor at Penn State University. She wrote an excellent introduction. I had the opportunity to read the introduction. Um, and one of the things about Anna Julia Cooper's life is that she never gave up in education. She defended the right for Black, melanated, colored people to have a liberal arts education. And her dissertation was about French slave attitudes towards slavery in the French colonies, which she sees as having an influence. And she wanted that dissertation to be read by people of color in the continental United States, although she was writing about the conditions in Haiti and attitudes in France about slavery in France and in the French colonies, including Haiti or Saint Domingue. So she was a very sophisticated, she spoke several languages. She taught Latin, she spoke French, she wrote in French. Uh, and she's just an amazing woman. And the obstacle that she overcome that I especially appreciated is when she was accused of molesting a young boy by the Tuskegee machine, essentially. And I write about this in my introduction to the collection of essays about Toni Morrison's last novel, called Critical Responses about the Black Family and Toni Morrison's God Help the Child. I write that that last novel is based on two events. One of those two, the first of the two events is what happened to Anna Julia Cooper at the M Street Colored School in DC, now Dunbar High School. And basically, she was uh, falsely accused of molesting a young boy and had to withdraw from being principal. And similar to the plot in the novel, without giving the story away, you got to read that. You have to study cases for yourself and not believe everything that's in the Washington Post, and not believe that's everything that's in the New York Times, not believe everything in the mainstream media. Her life is a great example. And I saw Shirley Moody Turner at the Urbana Library, Urbana Regional Library in upstate Maryland. And it was amazing what Dr. Turner said that I remember was what her letters, which is in this reader, to Du Bois, and how she had a lot of criticism of Du Bois for his elitism, for his not including certain aspects of African American life, um, for just a lot of things. And it just made me look at her in a different light. So check this out. Check out the Portable Anna Julia Cooper reader. And a reader is like a survey of the most important pieces. I appreciate at the end of the introduction What Dr. Turner writes about uh, Anna Julia Cooper having a racial philosophy. She says, my racial philosophy is not far removed from my general philosophy of life, that the greatest happiness comes from altruistic service, and this is in reach of all of whatever race and condition. And it was, as Cooper stated, her lifelong work as a teacher and trained thinker that had prepared her for the task. And then she has all the letters where she's highly critical of Du Bois, and you really get a deeper, thorough view of Black life when you read her rationale. So check this book out. It's the Portable Anna Julia Cooper Reader, and it's now published by Penguin Classics um, with a foreword. Is it a foreword? It's a sort of foreword by Henry Louis Gates. What is an African American classic? This beautiful illustration, cover art of Dr. Cooper's seated is by Makeba Rainey. Is by Makeba Rainey. And check out also Voice from the South, A Voice from the South, because that documents her experience and her dedication to a deeper liberal arts education rather than just vocational education. Um, so many interesting. I'm interested in really. I was reading her dissertation, which she did at the Sorbonne, and it was originally in French. And I think she's very serious about uh, uh, melanated people understanding Caribbean history, because she's very clear on the influence of the Haitian Revolution on the Civil War. Anna Julia Cooper is. So check her out. Thank you, Dr. Turner, for making her reading more accessible, as well as a host of other scholars of Anna Julia Cooper, including Charles Lemaire, Esme Bond. Several others have written about Anna Julia Cooper. All right, check out Sidney the Film by Reginald Hudlin and Ms. Oprah Winfrey. Check out The Significance of Sidney Poitier by Mike Dennis and Charles Wood. And make sure you, when you can, read the Portable Anna Julia Cooper Reader by Dr. Shirley Moody Turner. All right, this concludes my 17th YouTube Live. Please, if you just watch this, subscribe, like, and share my YouTube. Tell people about it. I try and do it every week. Yesterday, I was moving. The day before, I was in transit. But please share this YouTube, like it, subscribe to the channel. And if you appreciate it and learn something, don't hesitate to give to my Cash App. All right. Thank you for your time. Have a great evening. Stay tuned for my next YouTube.